This particular performance study starts with kind of a question and answer approach to soloing, which can be a very effective tool to use when you're taking a solo that could be in a situation if you're playing in a duo. As soon as that person stops singing or stops playing, it immediately becomes a solo guitar gig. And you know, you're calming behind somebody else when they solo, but when it comes time for you to solo, then the bottom can sometimes feel like it drops out. So let's take a look at a couple of different ways that you can deal with that from a solo guitar standpoint. One effective way is to create a question and answer type of call and response dialogue with yourself. And there are a few different ways to do that. One way is to do a call and response between chords and single note lines. And that's exactly what's happening in the first several bars of this study. So we're starting right off with the tonic of the song in E flat major, and we're going to use our guide tone structure of E flat major 9. So we have our E flat major 7 guide tones with a 9th on top. And then we can just start off with a simple rhythmic figure. That's kind of the question. That's the opening phrase. And we can answer that with a single note line. And what's really cool about these guide tone structures is, you know, you can basically stay in position and more or less outline the sound of the chord using the guide tone voicings as a framework. And it's important to really stick to outlining the essential chord tones when you're playing solo because, you know, there's nothing else to give it context. If you start playing way outside, then it's just going to start sounding like a wrong chord. You have to more or less keep it inside the framework to keep the progression in your ears. So in the second bar, starting with the fourth beat of the first measure, we're just simply outlining an E flat major 9 arpeggio. And that's kind of extracted right from this guide tone shape. And that's the answer to our question and answer. So we start out with a question, answer. The second question is the next chord voicing, D minor 7 flat 5. So the idea is to maybe create this illusion of one person comping, one person playing rhythm, while another person is soloing. And when it gets interesting is when you start to fold those two parts together. So a question and answer, call and response can be a very effective tool. And then you could put those together, and that's exactly what happens in measure 4 on the first beat. We have this melody note, the D sharp, right on top of the G7 chord. And another way to look at that again is a kind of a duplex two-part structure there where it's a melody note right on top of your guide tone G7. And I think thinking in terms of chord voicings in those terms of the duplex term or you know, splitting the guitar into those 3 distinct sections can really help you organize playing a lead line over chords, because you're not thinking of, you know, how is this going to fit in the middle of a chord. It's just going to be placed right on top of this chord voicing in the same way that a pianist would play, you know, a single note line with their right hand and then the left hand would comp, just in the way that Bill Evans would play solo piano, for example. So now we're bringing them together using fingerstyle technique to just simply claw them both and then go right into the single note line. And then that line ends with this G, and that G is folded right in the middle of a C minor 7 chord. So it's nice to kind of blur the lines sometimes, you know, between the question and answer. From there we have a couple of double stops. That's another example of a question and answer. This time, instead of the question and answer dialogue being between 2 different parts, a chord and a single note line, the question and answer is almost between 2 phrases. So we have this first phrase that starts in measure 5 with a C minor 7. So we have this one line. And then now the answer to that would be pretty much the same phrase down a whole step to B flat minor 7. And then it's resolved with the following A flat major 9. So again, in context, it's so we have this question, and then the answer is, and then it resolves with the A flat major 9, which is a nice place to resolve because we're in a new kind of a tonal center, and we're resolving to a nice consonant major 9 chord. And we're repeating this kind of Charleston figure that we've heard earlier. So it sounds like, a melodic line that's being supported by chords here and there. So one thing that you may try to do when you're composing your own etudes or solo guitar arrangements, start out composing a bunch of these, compose them, practice them, compose them, and maybe even write them down first, and then practice them. And then after a lot of practice, you'll be able to do this organically and intuitively, and you'll be able to start improvising these arrangements in real time. But it starts out with this idea of just a melodic line, and then figuring out places to harmonize those with chord voicings. So from the D flat 13, and again, we're using a simple guide tone voicing. Most of the time when you have your melody on the top two strings, there will be a guide tone voicing standing by and ready to serve your solo. And then just drop it right in there. And now from here is just kind of like a walk down, a couple of chord substitutions to prepare us for the next phrase on F13. So it's just a kind of a chromatic approach to C, which is the setup chord, the 5 of the F. So it's just kind of nice to just chromatically move down there. E flat, D7 sharp 9, D flat 9, C7 sharp 9, instead of just abruptly changing to the F7. It's a smooth way of getting down there, and it's also rhythmic. And then, from there, we go into a single note line. And that's all based around an F9 type of sound. Then we move to F minor. And then the 5. And in that B flat 7 flat 9 figure, we're just setting it off. We're starting it off with the guide tone, and then continuing right up through the arpeggio, flat 9 arpeggio. And then resolving home to the E flat major 7 chord in measure 17. But instead of landing right on that chord, that's an opportunity to start a new dialogue. So now the question is the single note line. And the answer is now the chord. So we're kind of flipping things around from the first chorus where we started off with a chord followed by a single note line. And doing these little, being mindful about creating some contrast creates interest in the music. It makes your arrangements more interesting sounding, and it's more interesting and more enjoyable to play. And again, after you think about doing this and put your intention there, after a while it just becomes a habit, and you're not even really aware that you're doing it. It's more subconscious at that point. So starting in 17, we're starting our question part of the phrase with a single line, followed by the answer of just simple major 7 guide tone shapes. And that's the end of that phrase. From there, we're going to take a look at some of the block chords that we looked at in the earlier concept section. And again, the idea behind block chords is harmonizing a melody from the top down. So if we look at the melody in measures 21 through 24, the melody is this. So it's a melody that's really based on the melody of the song, It can be a really interesting study to try to create your own melodies. I mean, this isn't a fancy burning line or anything like that. It's just a simple melody that's very much based on the original melody of the song that you're working with, and then take the melody that you come up with and come up with creative ways to harmonize that. And one way is to harmonize that using block chord figures. In this case, we're starting off with a block chord on the middle string sets with a... But then we very quickly move through the inversions of C minor 7, C minor 9, C minor 11, whatever sounds right to your ears, and we're harmonizing each of these notes. So again, the melody is... And one possible way of harmonizing that would be... And then we go into the B flat minor 9, voice lead that. We can turn that into it looks like a diminished chord, but it's functioning as an E flat 7 flat 9. We can do that because it's at the very end of the measure and it's a 5-to-1 relationship, E flat being the 5 of A flat And so we can convert that first E flat 9 chord on the and of beat 2 of that measure to a 7 flat 9, because it creates a little tension that wants to be resolved by the first A flat major 9 chord in measure 25. Okay, then we move on to the E flat major 7 tonicize again. And then just to, get our ears back into the tonic, it's nice to just land right on a chord, followed by a single note line. And again, that's just really outlining the arpeggio. It's just really outlining that major 9 arpeggio. And then a little turnaround here. We have A half diminished to D7 flat 9. So I thought it would just be interesting to outline that with a single note line. A little quote of the melody there. So on the beat 3 there, where we hit the D7 chord, this is an example where you can use the thumb drop technique that we discussed earlier and just drop in that bass note for context. You only need that one note. You don't even need to play a full chord. The chord will be outlined by your line. So we could go A minor 7 flat 5, use the thumb drop for the D, and then use the thumb drop in tandem with fingers to create an E flat triad to bring it back home. So the A, D to E flat line again is. Again, that's just kind of harmonizing a single note line, a melody, with the changes of the song. And then before we resolve, let's say if we were ending this song now, we have our 2-5, which is F minor 9, B flat 13 flat 9, and that melody, you can hear it. It wants to resolve to da. But one trick that a lot of guitar players and piano players use at the end of the song is harmonize that tonic, that do, that 1, with another chord. Instead of going like this, for example. Like that sounds wrong. That sounds out of context in this style. So one little trick is to play that E flat, the tonic in this case, and harmonize it with another chord. And there are dozens of chords that you could do this with. Basically anything that has the note E flat in it, And a lot of it depends on how much you want to stretch out the ending. So if I wanted to do a longer ending, I might, resolve it with I could resolve it with E flat over G, maybe over G flat, maybe a F minor 2-5, maybe a flat 2 major 7. Move down. But if I wanted to keep the ending a little shorter, then I might just find one chord that would be a nice resolution to the 1. And in this case, I chose a D flat 6-9. So the E flat is the top note of that D flat, and then we bring it home with a resolution of the 1. So those last 4 bars are